Go beg on the streets, you beggar! My own son's voice cut through the room like a blade, and in that instant, I felt the ground give way beneath me. I froze, standing before a table where every seat was taken, except one for me. The laughter that followed was sharper than any knife. My daughter-in-law's smirk, his cold glare, the deliberate absence of a chair, every detail screamed the same truth. I no longer belonged, not even to the child I once raised from nothing. My name is Hortense Wilcox, and that was the moment everything broke. Golden harbors glowed that evening, the kind of place where everything shimmered just enough to remind you that you didn't belong. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over tables dressed in flawless white, the gentle hum of a jazz trio weaving through the air. Glasses caught the glow like prisms, sparkling with each tilt of a wrist. I had told myself, walking in, that it was just another dinner, just another gathering. But the moment I reached the head table, I knew it wasn't. 3 chairs. That's all there were. One for Lucas, one for Paige, and another set carefully aside for a guest of importance. Not a single space for me. My heart thudded once, heavy and sharp, as if it understood before I did what this arrangement meant. Lucas leaned back, arms stretched across the sides of his chair like a king enthroned, his voice smooth but laced with a bite that sliced clean through me. There's no seat for you here. If you're hungry, the city has plenty of places more your speed. Paige's laughter followed, brittle and high, her ruby lips curving into something that wasn't amusement so much as triumph. She lifted her wine glass, the liquid trembling inside, and said sweetly, "He's right. Not everyone has the polish to fit in at a table like this." Heat rushed up my throat, but the rest of me went cold, as though the blood had been drained from my body in one sweep. Around us, conversations faltered. Forks and knives hovered midair. Strangers, people who didn't know me at all, tilted in their seats to stare, some openly, some behind half-shielded hands. The jazz stumbled to a quiet pause, the notes hanging awkwardly in the air. I stood there, my hands steady though I could feel the tremor rising inside me, begging to be seen. My son, the boy I had once held close when fevers racked his small body, had erased me with a single cruel sentence. My daughter-in-law, not content with silence, poured salt into the wound. And the world, the whole glittering, watching world, had a front-row seat to my humiliation. But I didn't retreat. I didn't plead. Slowly, deliberately, I set my clutch on the polished surface of the table. The sound cracked louder than it should have, a sharp cack that sliced through the hush. Not a request, not an apology. It was a claim, like planting a flag in hostile ground. The room seemed to lean forward, waiting for me to crumble. My smile was thin, so tight it ached at the corners of my mouth, but I kept it there, shielding the storm that raged inside. Shame pressed heavy on my chest, yet beneath it, something else stirred, something colder, harder, that steadied my spine. As my gaze swept the room, it caught on a detail small enough to be missed by others, but impossible for me to ignore. A young server stood nearby, tray balanced with the precision of someone trained to be invisible. But he wasn't looking through me the way the rest did. His eyes dipped, respectful, almost deferential. When they met mine, he lowered his head in a gesture that carried weight far beyond ordinary courtesy. It was subtle, barely a flicker in a room glittering with glass and arrogance. But it told me everything. Lucas and Paige weren't the only ones who knew something about who I was. That single bow, quiet and unassuming, whispered a truth they hadn't begun to suspect. And though my heart was raw from the sting of their words, though humiliation burned like fire under my skin, I felt the faintest shift, a reminder that the story unfolding tonight would not end the way Lucas believed. The memory of that apartment still comes back to me in sharp fragments: the peeling wallpaper, the stack of bills that never seemed to shrink, the small desk lamp burning into the early hours while the rest of the world slept. After Lucas's father was gone, it was just the two of us, and I carried everything on shoulders that often felt too fragile for the weight. By day, I pushed through hours at a modest real estate office, taking on the kind of grunt work no one else wanted. By night, I bent over thick manuals and investment guides, teaching myself the rules of management, learning how to make money move instead of letting it crush me. Lucas would sometimes wake up, rubbing his eyes, and find me still at that desk, my hands ink-stained, my coffee long gone cold. He'd crawl into my lap and beg me to turn off the light, but I never did. That lamp was the only thing keeping us afloat. I still remember the day I slipped the wedding band off my finger, the last tangible piece of the man I had loved. I sold it without a word, my throat thick with guilt, and used the money to pay Lucas's first semester of tuition. He never knew the sacrifice. To him, it was simply the way things were, his education provided, his path cleared. But to me, it was the moment I surrendered the last remnant of the life I once had, so he could build his... He had hugged me that evening, a boy of 18 with more confidence than I'd ever had at that age, and whispered into my neck, "I'll never make you ashamed of me, Mom." The words branded themselves into my heart. I clung to them in the years that followed, every time exhaustion threatened to drag me under, every time the sacrifices grew heavier than I could bear. For decades, I believed him. I let those words protect me like armor. Now, standing in Golden Harbors, the taste of his dismissal still raw on my tongue. Those same words curdled into irony. Shame was all I carried tonight, but not because of who I was, because of who he had chosen to become. And yet, even in that ache, a colder truth surfaced. Lucas had strutted through his career, parading the tale of a man who clawed his way to success with nothing but grit and wit. He had no idea the foundation beneath his empire was one I had built brick by brick, dollar by dollar. He had no idea that the majority of Wilcox Realty still bore my silent signature. For years, I stayed quiet, letting him bask in applause that should have been shared. Tonight, I realized the silence had gone on long enough. The years blurred into a cycle of events where I learned to disappear. Conferences where Lucas shined under spotlights while I stood pressed against the back wall. Corporate parties where he raised toasts to self-made beginnings, my presence carefully hidden away. Ribbon cuttings where cameras flashed and I was told to wait in the lobby until the guests left. His voice, always low enough for only me to hear, would come just before the crowd arrived. "Don't mention what you do, Mom. They don't need to know about that kind of work." The words stung more than any insult shouted across a crowded room because they stripped me of dignity in private, where there was no audience, no applause, just rejection from my own child. I nodded every time, smiling thinly, pretending it didn't matter, even as I stood behind curtains or slipped out back doors while he basked in the glow of admiration. He told the world he had lifted himself up from nothing, and I let the lie stand. Piece by piece, I became a shadow, the invisible scaffolding holding up a tower that never bore my name. But shadows don't last forever. As I sat in Golden Harbors, the sting of Paige's laughter still in my ears, a server brushed past me and with a subtle glance placed an envelope on the table near my hand. My fingers trembled as I touched it. The seal, pressed deep into the paper, carried a weight that felt more familiar than any jewel or keepsake. Inside was the proof, documents bearing the red stamp of ownership, the kind that could silence any voice raised against me. Golden Harbor's was not theirs. It was mine. My heart thundered, not from fear, but from certainty. Lucas and Paige thought this evening would be the stage for my humiliation. What they didn't know was that the stage already belonged to me. Tonight, the silence I had carried for decades was ending. The truth was no longer a secret waiting in locked drawers and hidden files. It sat in my clutch, heavy and undeniable, ready to change everything. The clinking of silverware softened into a hush, the kind of pause that spreads when something in the room feels off. I sat upright, my hands folded neatly beside the clutch that now felt heavier than it looked, a faint smile drawn across my lips like armor. The server who poured my water leaned lower, his deference so stark compared to the stiff indifference shown to Lucas and Paige that even my son noticed. Lucas's brow tightened, his tone laced with irritation. "Why are they treating you like that?" His eyes darted toward the server, then back to me, searching for an explanation I refused to give. I let the question hang in the air, silent, as I swirled the water in my glass, watching the light fracture against its surface. The silence stretched until a new voice cut through it. Oscar, the restaurant's manager, emerged from across the room, his posture impeccable, his stride purposeful. He came directly to me, ignoring the startled faces around him, and bowed slightly. "Madam Wilcox," he said with unshakable warmth, "it is an honor to serve you again." Lucas stiffened, his jaw slack as a flush crept across his face. "Mother, you know him?" His voice cracked, louder than he meant it to be, and a murmur rippled across the table. Before I could respond, a man rose from a nearby table, a well-dressed banker. His presence commanded respect without a word. He approached with a smile of recognition, extending his hand firmly. "I never imagined I'd find you here. Madam Wilcox, what a fortunate evening." The room buzzed alive, whispers rising from every corner. Who is she? What's going on? Eyes widened, heads leaned closer. For the first time that night, I wasn't invisible. The balance of power, delicate and unseen, began to shift. I held myself steady, though inside my chest, the beat of my heart thundered like a drum. This was the first crack in the facade Lucas had so carefully built, the first signal that the night would not belong to him after all. The air grew heavier, charged as though the walls themselves leaned closer to hear. What had begun as a celebration now felt like a courtroom, with every guest acting as judge and jury. Lucas sat rigid, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Stop playing games. You're not fooling anyone. People aren't respecting you, they're pitying you." Paige's arms folded across her chest, her smirk practiced and cruel. "They're just being polite. Anyone can see you don't belong here." I did not argue. I did not defend. With deliberate calm, I reached for the envelope that had been waiting patiently beside my clutch. The seal cracked softly as I drew out the papers and slid them across the linen tablecloth. The red stamps glared under the chandelier's light. Ownership documents, legal, undeniable. Golden Harbor's was not their triumph. It was mine. I met Lucas's eyes, his defiance faltering under the weight of truth. "You say this place isn't mine. Lucas, this very room exists because I built it. Every brick, every light, every corner of this house of glass carries my signature." A gasp broke through the crowd. Forks clattered against plates, and even the band froze mid-note. Lucas's voice shrank to a tremor. "No, that's not possible." His hands trembled as though the papers themselves burned to touch. Then the sharp crash of glass. Paige's hand slipped, her wine spilling across the pristine tablecloth. The red bled quickly, blooming like a wound, spreading between us. She stared at the stain as though it had betrayed her. I sat unmoving, a fire burning low and steady inside me. Years of being silenced, erased, hidden away, all of it coalesced in that moment. Humiliation turned to vindication, grief into steel. For the first time in decades, I wasn't just present, I was undeniable. The room was so quiet it felt unnatural, as if the chandeliers themselves had stilled. Every face turned toward me with a mixture of suspicion and awe, their eyes searching as if they'd been seated across from a stranger all along. Lucas's voice broke through the silence, jagged and desperate. "Mother, what is this? Is this some kind of trick? You're making this up." His words stumbled, failing to carry the authority he was so used to commanding. I leaned forward, my tone steady, calm, unshaken. "You want proof?" My hand slid across the table, placing another folder in plain view. The paper thudded softly against the linen, but in that hush, it sounded like a gavel. The room shifted again when David Morris stepped into the circle of light. His leather briefcase gleamed, the edges worn from years of courtrooms and boardrooms. He opened it with measured precision and spoke, his voice crisp. "All documents here are notarized and fully enforceable. Mrs. Wilcox is the majority shareholder and rightful owner of Golden Harbors." A murmur of disbelief swelled. Paige shot out of her chair, her wine-red dress rustling as she slammed her palms on the table. "No, this is staged. This is all a setup just to humiliate us." Her shriek carried, but it wavered, more fear than fury. And then came the blow she hadn't braced for. A man at a table near the back, salt and pepper hair, a familiar presence, rose and cleared his throat. A board member of Wilcox Realty, long retired yet still respected, fixed his gaze on Lucas before turning it back to me. If not for her, this company would have collapsed years ago. Every one of us knows it. We owe her everything we've built. The air cracked with whispers, guests leaning toward one another, their glances toward Lucas now laced not with admiration but disdain. The golden sun, stripped bare. For me, it was like shedding shackles link by link. Years of invisibility, of being erased from my own story, fell away under the weight of acknowledgement I had waited far too long to hear. Across from me, Lucas's complexion blanched, and Paige's bravado trembled. I understood then that this battle had left the confines of family. It had become a public reckoning. The atmosphere in the hall had transformed into a tribunal. Every murmur, every sharp inhale carried the weight of judgment. No one looked at me as an afterthought now. They looked as if they were witnessing a verdict in real time. Lucas's hands shook against the edge of the table, his voice stripped bare of arrogance. "Why did you keep this from me? I thought I built everything on my own." His words trembled on the edge of plea and denial. The sting in my chest was sharp, but my words came out cold and unwavering. "I kept it hidden not to disgrace you, but to see what kind of man you would choose to be. And now I see the truth. You chose wrong." Paige slammed her palm flat against the table, her face twisting. "This isn't justice, it's vengeance. What kind of mother does this to her son?" Her pitch rose, desperate to claw back control. I turned to her, my gaze steady, my voice cutting clean. "This isn't revenge, Paige. This is reality, and it's time you faced it." My hand reached once more into my clutch. A second envelope slid free, heavier than the first, the seal untouched until this moment. I pushed it forward. David Morris opened it, his voice filling the room as he read, "Effective immediately. Lucas Wilcox is removed as the default heir. All assets of Mrs. Wilcox are frozen and will only be released under new conditional terms." The gasp that followed was collective. the kind of silence that comes not from shock alone, but from recognition that something irreversible has happened. Lucas crumpled back into his chair, his face hollow. Paige's body sagged beside him, lips trembling, the fire in her eyes extinguished by fear. The ache inside me pulsed like an old wound reopened. This was my son, the boy who once promised never to shame me, reduced to a husk of his own ambition. Yet beneath the pain surged something else, something long denied, the liberating surge of reclaiming my voice, my worth, my dignity. At last, the words that had been stolen from me for decades were mine again. And this time, they were undeniable. The crystal chandelier above us seemed to burn hotter, its light catching every anxious flicker of the crowd's eyes. The air inside Golden Harbors was thick, heavy, pulsing like the silence before a storm breaks. All around, silver cutlery lay abandoned, glasses half raised, every guest waiting to see if I would crush or spare the two people sitting across from me. I rose slowly, letting my chair scrape against the polished floor with deliberate weight. My voice carried clearly, strong enough to cut through the stagnant air. "Lucas," I said, steady but sharp. "If you believe this is about humiliating you, then listen carefully. You are wrong. This isn't the end. You still have one chance, but you'll have to earn it. And that means facing 6 conditions." Every syllable landed like a stone dropped into water. My fingers tapped once against the tablecloth, each tap punctuating what I was about to say. I held Lucas's gaze, then began. "First," I said, my tone firm, "you will leave that mansion you prize so much. For 1 year, you and Paige will live in a modest apartment among ordinary people. You'll learn what it means to live without the mask of luxury." A murmur rolled through the room. I saw Lucas blanch, his jaw tightening, his hand balling into a fist on the table. Paige's painted lips parted, but no sound came out. "Second," I continued, my voice unrelenting, "you will work in a modest restaurant, not as an executive, not as a guest of honor, as a server. You will carry trays, clear dishes, and meet the eyes of strangers who owe you nothing." The crowd stirred louder this time, some nodding, others whispering in disbelief. "Third," I said, turning my eyes on Paige, "you will work at the front of that same restaurant, greeting guests. You will smile when you don't want to. You will wait when patience runs thin, and you will learn that respect isn't bought with money. It is given when it is earned." Paige snapped her head toward me, eyes blazing, but when she caught the room full of watchful faces, her anger faltered into silence. "Fourth," I pressed on, "every week, both of you will volunteer at a nursing home. You will sit with the forgotten, you will listen to their stories, you will push their wheelchairs, and you will know what it means to give time, not just money." Gasps rippled. Someone muttered, "That's tougher than any fine." "Fifth," I said, letting the words sharpen, "you will write 2 letters of apology. One to the company you so proudly represent for the way you disrespected your own family, and one to the public, printed in the local paper, apologizing to every elder you dismissed as less than you." The sting of that condition struck deep. I saw Lucas flinch, Paige's knuckles whitening against her glass. "And sixth," I concluded, my hand steady on the back of my chair, "once a week, you will come to me, not with excuses, not with hollow gestures. You will sit, you will listen, and you will be real. One lie, one missed visit, one moment of mockery, and everything I own, every last dollar, goes directly to charity. No appeal, no second chances." For a moment, silence reigned, so profound it felt like the chandeliers themselves held their breath. Then the crowd broke into a restless wave of whispers, chairs shifting, hands covering mouths, and from the far end of the room, a single pair of palms began to clap, then another, then more. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then swelling into something fierce and undeniable. I stood still, the sound washing over me, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with something heavier, deeper. Not triumph, not cruelty. This was the judgment I had carved with my own hands. A sentence, yes, but also a chance, a human chance, for the boy I once cradled and the woman he chose to stand beside him. It wasn't revenge. It was the only bridge left standing between destruction and redemption. And I had laid it out beneath the harsh glow of the chandelier for the world to see. Weeks passed, and the shine of Golden Harbor's chandelier was replaced with fluorescent lights, scuffed floors, and the grating clatter of everyday life. This was where Lucas and Paige now had to prove themselves, stripped of silk and champagne. Lucas at Riverbend Grill looked like a stranger to himself. His pressed shirts were gone, replaced by a server's uniform that clung to him with sweat. I watched from a corner booth one afternoon as he carried a tray stacked with glasses, his knuckles white around the edges. When a group of young men called him over, snickering, they kept ordering water refills just to make him shuffle back and forth. By the fourth time, one of them muttered loud enough to sting, "Didn't you used to be somebody?" Lucas's jaw tensed, his lips parted, the words caught between fury and shame. Then they slipped. "Maybe you should stop acting like clowns and let me work," he snapped, voice cutting sharper than he meant. The glasses rattled, one nearly tipping. The restaurant went still for a beat, all eyes on him. The manager rushed in, pulling him aside with a stern look. I followed them into the break room, the air heavy with the smell of grease and sweat. Lucas sat slumped on a folding chair, hands in his hair, chest rising and falling too fast. "You can't talk to guests like that," the manager said flatly. Lucas only muttered, "I can't do this. Mom, I tried. I really did. But being treated like garbage..." His voice cracked. I didn't raise my voice. I simply met his eyes, steady and cold. And how different was that from the way you treated me? Now you know. The question is, will you keep running or will you learn? He looked away, ashamed, but the silence between us was answer enough. Paige fared no better. At the nursing home, she was supposed to sit with a silver-haired widow who spent her afternoons waiting for someone to read poetry to her. That Saturday, Paige grew restless after an hour, her manicure chipped, her phone buzzing. She made an excuse and slipped out early. The old woman waited another 2 hours, her book still open on her lap. When the director told me, my chest tightened with a pain that was more disappointment than anger. That night, I went to their small apartment, a far cry from their mansion, with peeling paint and thin walls where every sound carried. The air inside was heavy, a mix of takeout containers and unspoken fear. Lucas sat hunched at the small kitchen table, Paige at the vanity, scrolling her phone. Both looked up like children caught sneaking out of school. I didn't waste words. One slip I can forgive, but if you repeat it, everything ends, every dollar, every chance. The weight of my voice left no room for argument. They said nothing. I turned to leave, my footsteps echoing down the stairwell. And yet, sometimes collapse is the only way to learn to rise. A week later, something shifted. Lucas called me, hesitant, asking if I would look at something. When I arrived, he laid out a letter, pages of messy handwriting, ink blotted where the pen had stuttered. It was his apology to his company. The sentences were clumsy, the lines uneven, but I saw it in the tremor of his hand, the sincerity. He wasn't writing for inheritance. He was writing because shame had finally cut deeper than pride. Paige surprised me more. When I stopped by unannounced one evening, the apartment smelled faintly of broth. She stepped out of the kitchen, apron tied awkwardly around her waist, her cheeks flushed not with makeup but with effort. "I tried something," she said, setting a bowl of soup on the table. "One of the ladies at the nursing home taught me, said it was her late husband's favorite." I sat down, tasting it carefully. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm, filling, honest. For the first time, I looked at Paige and didn't see mockery. Her eyes were uncertain, almost shy, searching my face for approval. She didn't laugh, didn't sneer. She truly wanted, to be seen as more than the woman who once poured scorn into her words like poison. I let the silence sit, spoon resting in the bowl. Then I nodded, a small gesture, but I saw her shoulders ease as if she'd been carrying a boulder. Walking home that night, the city lights blurred against my eyes. Pain still gnawed at me, pain for the years wasted, for the cruel words that couldn't be unsaid, but under the weight of that ache, a flicker of something fragile stirred. Hope. Maybe, just maybe. What I saw in their faces wasn't just fear of losing wealth. Maybe it was the beginning of change, raw and trembling, but real. Winter pressed against the windows, the glass fogging from the warmth inside my apartment. The table between us was bare except for a single candle and the open folder of legal documents. David sat across from me, pen in hand, his eyes steady but waiting. Lucas and Paige were side by side, too quiet, the weight of what was about to be said pressing on their shoulders like snow. I folded my hands, my voice even. "You've changed." I began slowly, but wounds don't vanish overnight. That's why the door I open for you is only halfway. David lifted the papers, reading my decision aloud. 60% of Mrs. Wilcox's estate will go to the community fund. 20% will support single mothers. The remaining 20% is designated for Lucas and Paige, conditional upon continued good conduct for the next 2 years. The silence broke with Lucas's choked whisper, "Mother, I won't fail you again. Not this time." Beside him, Paige's tears fell freely. Her voice cracked, but for the first time, she said it. "Mom." Later, when the apartment was empty again, I lit the candle and opened my journal. The pen moved steady across the page. I didn't choose revenge. I chose justice. I chose not to stay silent anymore. My legacy isn't only money, it's dignity. The flame flickered against the glass, painting my reflection back at me, no longer the discarded mother, a woman who had reclaimed her voice and her fate.